June 3rd, 1956. The Cotton Club, 142nd Street, 11:18 p.m. Mamie Johnson stood in an emerald green dress, celebrating her birthday with 12 friends. The band played Duke Ellington, champagne flowed, and laughter filled the air. Then Tommy the Tongue Rossetti stumbled past her table. Drunk on power and gin, the 28-year-old Genovese enforcer stopped, turned, and looked directly at Bumpy Johnson's wife and said one word, whore, loud enough for 50 witnesses to hear. The band stopped mid-note, glasses froze mid-air, and the entire Cotton Club went silent. This was neutral territory, the Switzerland of Harlem, and everyone knew what came next, except Tommy kept walking, laughing, like he'd just told the funniest joke in New York. Mamie's hands trembled as her friends surrounded her, and for the first time anyone could remember, tears rolled down her face. Bumpy Johnson wasn't even there. He was 3 blocks away on Lenox Avenue settling a dispute over numbers territory. But word travels fast in Harlem. By 11:47 p.m., 29 minutes after the insult, Bumpy received the call. Witnesses say he went completely silent with no rage. No threats, no broken furniture, just 6 words. Tell Mamie I'll handle it. What happened in the next 72 hours would send a message so brutal, so calculated, that the 5 families would never disrespect a Harlem wife again. 3 days later, a small package arrived at Vito Genovese's Manhattan office with no return address, no note, just tissue paper, and inside that tissue, Tommy's tongue. But Tommy made 3 fatal mistakes that night. The first, he said it. The second, he laughed. The third, he walked out alive. Because Bumpy's revenge wasn't designed for speed, it was designed for legend. To understand why this one word sealed Tommy's fate and changed the rules of engagement between Harlem and the mob forever, you need to know 3 things. Who Mamie Johnson really was, why Tommy thought he was untouchable, and what Bumpy Johnson did when respect turned to war. Mamie Hatcher Johnson wasn't just Bumpy's wife. She was educated, the daughter of a preacher, and married Bumpy in 1948 when he was transitioning from street muscle to strategic mastermind. She wasn't arm candy. She was the architect behind Bumpy's transformation from enforcer to godfather. She read contracts, negotiated deals, and taught Bumpy that intelligence beat violence every single time. The Cotton Club was neutral territory in 1956, a place where mob and Harlem coexisted, where business got done without bloodshed. It was the Switzerland of organized crime. Disrespecting someone there violated every unwritten rule. But 1956 was different because the Appalachian meeting in November 1957 was coming. Federal heat was building, and the Italian Mafia was testing boundaries to see how far they could push. And Harlem? They thought Harlem could be pushed. Enter Tommy the Tongue Rossetti. 28 years old, Genovese family soldier who earned his nickname from his smart mouth, not his fate, though the irony would become legend. Vito Genovese's lieutenant had sent him to Harlem with one job, remind the uptown players who really ran New York. Tommy had already intimidated 3 black numbers operators in Brooklyn, squeezed them for higher protection payments, and made them bow. He grew overconfident. $15,000 a month flowed from Harlem to the Genovese family through numbers, gambling, and protection. Tommy wanted to double it and thought disrespecting Bumpy's wife at the Cotton Club would show weakness, make Bumpy negotiate from fear. He miscalculated. When Mamie left the Cotton Club that night with tears streaming down her face, it was the first time anyone saw her cry in public. Her friends tried to console her while the club manager immediately called Bumpy saying, "I got bad news, Bump." In 1956, Harlem, disrespecting a gangster's wife wasn't just personal. It was a declaration that you viewed him as weak, his territory as conquered, his power as theater. This wasn't about $15,000 in monthly payments. This was about $2 million annually in gambling. Numbers and protection all dependent on respect. You lose everything. Bumpy arrived at the Cotton Club within 20 minutes, and witnesses say his face showed nothing, no anger, no emotion, just cold calculation. His inner circle wanted blood immediately with guns loaded, cars ready, just give the word. But Bumpy asked 3 questions. Where does Tommy live? Who does he love, and who delivers Geneviese's mail? His men looked confused because they wanted war, but Bumpy wanted information. Because what Bumpy understood, what Tommy never learned, is that revenge isn't about erasing the disrespect. It's about making sure it never happens again. And for that, you need theater. Tommy thought power came from fear, but Bumpy knew it came from precision. Tommy wanted to be respected, but Bumpy was already respected. That's why only one of them would see the end of the week. For 48 hours, nothing happened. Tommy bragged to his crew about putting that uptown queen in her place and told his Genovese bosses he'd softened up the Harlem situation. He even sent flowers to the Cotton Club as a joke, black roses with a note, for the whore. He thought he'd won. But on June 5th, 1956, at exactly 6 a.m., Tommy Rossetti's world started to disappear, one piece at a time. June 5th, 1956, 6 a.m. Tommy woke up to silence. His girlfriend wasn't in bed, not in the bathroom, not in the kitchen, just gone. He walked outside to his car, a 1955 Cadillac Eldorado in candy apple red, his pride, but the parking spot was empty, not stolen, just gone, like it never existed. Tommy's hands shook as he lit his first cigarette of the morning, thinking probably nothing. She took the car and went shopping, yeah. He called her apartment, but the line was disconnected. He drove there, borrowed his neighbor's Buick, and found the building superintendent changing locks. "Where's Angela?" Tommy demanded. "Who?" "Angela Moretti, apartment 4B. The super checked his clipboard saying no Angela here. Apartment's vacant, been vacant 3 days. Tommy's cigarette fell from his lips. He made 14 phone calls that morning to his Genovese crew, his lieutenant, even Carmine Esposito himself. 0 callbacks. By noon, paranoia had set in because everywhere Tommy looked he saw familiar faces, Harlem faces, standing on corners, sitting in cars, walking behind him. Not threatening, not approaching, just watching. At 3 p.m., Tommy returned to his apartment building and found a single black rose on his doorstep with a note attached. Tick-tock. Sweat soaked through his undershirt and his hand trembled, lighting his 4th cigarette in an hour. 227 people lived on Tommy's block, but not one of them saw who took his car. Not one heard Angela leave, and no one saw anything. That's when Tommy understood this wasn't random, this was orchestrated. His favorite restaurant, closed for renovations. The bar where he ran his numbers, suddenly under new management. The tailor who made his suits, moved to Jersey. Every piece of Tommy's life was being erased systematically, professionally, like a ghost was wiping him from existence. By 6 p.m., Tommy was frantic and had 2 choices. Run to Miami and never look back, or face his boss and ask for protection. He chose wrong. At 9 p.m., Tommy walked into the Palma Boy Social Club on Mulberry Street in Little Italy, Genovese territory, supposedly safe. He expected protection but found Bumpy Johnson sitting across from Carmine Esposito. The room had 8 men where 7 were Genovese soldiers with hands near their weapons and faces hard. But the one who controlled that room wore a Harlem suit. Bumpy didn't stand, didn't speak, just slid a manila envelope across the table. Tommy's eyes went to it, then to Carmine, then back to Bumpy. "Open it," Carmine said quietly. Inside were photographs. Angela, alive and unharmed, sitting in a Harlem apartment under Bumpy's protection. Receipts for Tommy's Cadillac sold to Harlem businessmen for $1 with legal transfer and notarized. Lease termination for Angela's apartment signed by a landlord who owed Bumpy 3 favors. Every piece of Tommy's life, documented and controlled. Carmine looked at the photos, looked at Bumpy, looked at Tommy, and his face said everything. "You brought this to our door." Bumpy's first words in that room came calm as Sunday morning. "Your boy disrespected my wife." What happened in the next 4 minutes would become legend. Not because of what Bumpy said, but because of what he didn't have to say. Bumpy leaned forward with fingers steepled and eyes locked on Carmine, not Tommy. June 3rd, 11:18 p.m. The Cotton Club, neutral territory. My wife's birthday, 50 witnesses. He let that sit before adding, "Your soldier called her a whore." Tommy tried to speak, saying it was just words, Bump. I was drunk, but Bumpy cut him off ice cold. Words are all we got. You chose yours. Carmine's jaw tightened because he'd heard about this and hoped it would blow over. It wasn't blowing over. Bumpy pulled out a second envelope, thicker this time, and receipts spilled onto the table. $47,000 weekly. That's what flows from Harlem to your family through numbers, gambling, and protection. Carmine's eyes narrowed. Flowed. Bumpy corrected with past tense. I stopped it 2 days ago. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees as Bumpy continued. That's $2.4 million annually, gone, until the disrespect is addressed. Tommy watched his boss's face and saw the calculation happening behind those eyes. His life versus $2.4 million. The math wasn't even close. I'm not asking for permission, Carmine, Bumpy said. I'm giving you a choice. You handle him your way, or I handle him mine. But either way, he pays for what he said. The genius wasn't the threat. It was the economics. Bumpy had framed this as business, not emotion. Made it a numbers game, and in organized crime, numbers always win. Carmine's body language shifted as he leaned away from Tommy and toward Bumpy. In that moment, Tommy stopped being a Genovese soldier and became a business expense. What Carmine said next would echo through organized crime for decades. 6 words that changed the rules forever. You disrespected this man's wife? Fix it. Tommy's voice cracked, saying, Carmine, please. But Bumpy shook his head slowly. Too late for apologies. Silence filled the room with 8 men all understanding what came next. Bumpy's pronouncement came measured and final. A man who disrespects women with his mouth? He don't need that mouth. Nobody moved and nobody breathed. Carmine looked at Tommy, then nodded slowly. This was the first time an Italian crime family gave permission for Harlem to discipline one of their own. A seismic shift in power dynamics. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper, saying, Carmine. But Carmine had already looked away. Get him out of here, he said to his men. 4 Genovese soldiers stood and grabbed Tommy's arms. He didn't resist, couldn't. As they dragged him to the door, Tommy locked eyes with Bumpy one last time. Bumpy's expression never changed, with no satisfaction, no rage, just business. Tommy was escorted out by his own men, and what happened in the next 6 hours remains in shadow except for the package. Tommy came to that meeting thinking he'd get protection, but Bumpy came with receipts. Tommy had excuses, but Bumpy had economics. In organized crime, only one language matters. On June 8, 1956, at 9:15 a.m., a small package arrived at Vito Genovese's office in Manhattan with no return address, no note, just a name on the label. From Harlem with respect. When Genovese opened it, he understood immediately. The rules had changed. The package was small, a wooden box that was velvet-lined and tissue-wrapped with no blood, clinical and professional. Inside, wrapped carefully, was Tommy Rossetti's tongue. Vito Genovese stared at it for a full minute, then picked up the phone, saying, Put him on the phone now. FBI informants later reported the call lasted 4 minutes with no yelling, no threats, just 2 businessmen establishing terms. When it ended, the $47,000 in weekly gambling revenue resumed flowing from Harlem to the Genovese family. But the split had changed to 60-40 now, favoring Harlem, up from 50-50. Bumpy gained $7,000 weekly without firing a single shot. Tommy Rossetti's body was never found, and his family was told he moved to Nevada, started over with a new life. His crew never spoke his name again. Within 30 days, word spread through all 5 families that Harlem's women were off limits, period. Not suggestions, not guidelines, but rules. The Lucchese family sent an emissary with $10,000 as a courtesy payment. The Colombo family sent $8,000. The Bonanno family sent $15,000. All delivered personally to Bumpy's Lenox Avenue office and all accompanied by the same message: we respect the boundary. FBI surveillance files declassified in 1998 contained a memo dated June 15, 1956, that read, Subject Bumpy Johnson has established unprecedented negotiating position via psychological warfare tactics. Recommend continued observation. Translation: even the FBI was impressed. The tongue package became legend, whispered about in every mob social club from New York to Chicago. "Don't be a Tommy" became shorthand, a warning to anyone thinking about crossing certain lines. But here's what most people miss about this story. Bumpy understood what most gangsters never learn. Violence is common. Anybody can pull a trigger, swing a bat, throw a punch. But calculated consequence, that requires intelligence. He didn't kill Tommy for revenge. He killed Tommy to establish a border, and he did it with Geneviese's permission, making the mob complicit in their own boundary. This is how you build lasting power, not by being the scariest person in the room, but by making everyone in the room afraid of what happens if they cross you. The difference? Subtle, but deadly. FBI files declassified in 1998 revealed something else. From June 1956 until Bumpy's death in 1968, 12 years, not a single Italian mobster was reported to have disrespected a Harlem woman. Not one incident, not one complaint, not one crossed line. Court testimony from the 1963 Valachi hearings, when Joe Valachi exposed mafia operations, contains a footnote where a soldier mentions Harlem rules when discussing territorial respect. When pressed by prosecutors to explain, he said, "You just don't go there ever." Tommy Rossetti lost his tongue because he didn't understand a simple truth. Power isn't about what you say, it's about what you don't have to say. Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for 30 years because every threat he made was a promise kept and every boundary he drew was written in consequences. That's not gangsterism, that's governance. But this wasn't Bumpy's most brutal move, because when a police captain tried to shake him down for $100,000, what Bumpy did next made the NYPD apologize. The legend of the tongue package spread through organized crime like wildfire. But to understand the full weight of this moment, you need to see who Bumpy Johnson really became after 1956. Bumpy's formula was simple: swift consequence, lasting lesson, economic leverage. Three elements that transformed street respect into institutional policy. He didn't just punish Tommy, he made Tommy's punishment profitable. Tommy the Tongue Rossetti had his last confirmed sighting on June 7, 1956, and was declared legally dead in 1963. Carmine Esposito maintained his relationship with Bumpy until Bumpy's death in 1968 and reportedly attended the funeral. Mamie Johnson lived until 2009 at 94 years old and published a memoir that carefully avoided mentioning Tommy by name. Just the man who learned too late. But those close to her said she wore emerald green, the dress from that night, to every major Harlem event afterward. It became her power color. 68 years later, the tongue package remains one of organized crime's most referenced cautionary tales. Not because of its brutality, because there were worse, but because of its precision, its purpose, its permanence. Bumpy's war with disrespect didn't end with Tommy. When NYPD Captain William Reardon walked into Bumpy's club, slapped $100,000 in protection demands on the table, and threatened to burn Harlem down, what happened next made the police commissioner personally apologize to Harlem. The weapon Bumpy used? Not guns, not money, but information. Watch the next video to discover how Bumpy Johnson made the NYPD bow. The legend of Bumpy Johnson isn't built on violence, it's built on consequence. And the lesson Tommy Rossetti learned, the one that cost him his tongue, is still being taught today. Respect Harlem's queens or pay the price every single time.